Alright, Assalamualaikum and good morning to everyone. So today we look into the last chapter for IMS511, problem solving and program design 2. So for the chapter 7 is object oriented programming. So what is actually object-oriented programming? So last week we have looked into C++ function. So object-oriented programming, I think is the concept that is more that's considered more advanced compared to the function. Okay, for the functions usually the function only process the structure of the data. They do not process the data actually. But for the object oriented programming, they process or they handle both structure and data. Okay, meaning that by using the object oriented programming, you can create a lot of object. Okay, and this object can have multiple value or multiple data. Okay, for example, if you have different value for car, okay, you have Produa, you have Produa Viva, MyV, Ativa, and so on. So each of these object can be created, and they will have their own variable, or they will have their own unique data compared to the function you just updating the same variable all over again, mean that you only have one variable, and that one variable only process or can be stored or can store only one data at a time. So why OOP is important? So for sure, OOP is faster and easier to execute. I always like to say that whenever you are creating the object-oriented programming, or you are creating a class, you are actually creating something for someone else, for other programmer or for other user. To make their life, to make their programming more easier and more effective, more faster. Okay, meaning that you need to consider all the possibility that will happen for that coding. Okay, for example, let's say you are doing a CGPA calculator. Okay, you are doing a CGPA calculator, so you have to think what are the process that involved in the CGPA calculator. Okay, for example, you need to add new subject, you need to update new subject, and you need to calculate how many subject that the student have. You need to calculate what we call it, the credit hour, and you need to request those kind of data from the student and so on. So you need to consider all the possibility and create a substructure on your class. So whenever other user want to use that kind of function or that kind of class, they can make what we call it a minimal interference or minimal request to the coding. Okay, for example, just sending a data to your classes, so all the processing will be done by the classes that you have developed. So that's why I say that whenever you are doing a classes, or whenever you are doing an object-oriented programming, you are creating a foundation for others. Okay, you are creating a foundation for others. So this is the concept of object-oriented programming. So you will create a class. Okay, for example, class is fruit. And for the fruit, you have an object. So you can have as many objects that you want, and this object can or will have a different value. Okay, for example, object 1 you have apple, object 2 you have banana, and object 3 you have mango. Okay, for example, class is car, you can have Volvo, Audi, and Toyota. Okay, so in object-oriented programming, these two concepts is very important. You must know how to differentiate between class and also for the object. So this example of the basic syntax, you need to declare class and name of the class. So name of the class, it must be unique, and within those class you can have several function or several what we call it several coding together. You can use either function, you can use array, you can use looping, and so on. Okay, for example, on this function, okay, you need to have a public. Public means that it can be accessed by anyone. And on this example, we declare two variables, integer my num and string my string. Alright, and to access this thing, you can look into the example. So whenever you want to use the class, you need to call the class, or you need to assign it into the variable. Okay, you need to assign your class into an object. Okay, into an object. For example, we have my obj or my object. So my class space my obj. So right now, whenever you are making this statement or you are making this declaration, so automatically my obj will have the characteristic of the class. Okay, so if you look into the class, there are two parameters, okay, which is my num and my string. So automatically when you declare my obj, so my obj will have these two characteristics, which is my num and my string. So the next step is you just assign the value to the my obj. Okay, for example, my obj dot my num. So this one would be integer, so it equal 15. And my obj dot my string and some text. Okay, and then you can just display those data into your program. For example, cout my obj dot my num, cout my obj dot my string. And if you have multiple objects, so just create a new object with a new name. Okay, for example, you have car.obj1 and car.obj2. So every of this object will have a different value. Okay, for example, obj1, the brand is BMW. Okay, for obj2, the brand is Ford. Okay, and you whenever you want to display, so just put it based on the object that you have created. Okay, for example, car obj1 model, car obj2 model, and so on. And class method, okay, we have private and public. This one, if you want to call using the function, okay, for example, void my method, you need to put it within the opening and closing classes. Okay, and you just call it like usual. Okay, for example, my obj dot my method. Okay, so this means that you are calling the function. Okay, calling the function of my method, so the output will be the hello world. Okay, another example. So this one, if you put the function outside of the class. So if you put the function outside of the class, so there is a different way of calling that function. You can either use the regular expression, or if you want to still to put it within the same classes, you can call it using the object declaration. Okay, and constructor. So constructor is a special method that is automatically called when an object of class is created. So to create a constructor, use the same name as the class followed by parentheses. Okay, if you want to create a constructor means that it will call its own classes, or it will call its own function. So mean that whenever you start your program, this thing will be automatically executed. Okay. So this is example. Okay, for example, we create a two object. Okay, car object 1 and car object 2. So car object 1 we have a different value. Car object 2 we have another different value. Okay, and then you look into the class car. So we have the public function. You put string brand, string model, and integer year. Okay, and then we put car, string x, string y, and integer z. So constructor with parameters. Okay, so these parameters will come from the object that you send to the classes. And access specifier. So how do you access your function? So by now you should be familiar with the keyword that appear in all of our class example. Okay, which is my class, public, and so on. So the public keyword is an access specifier. Access specifier define how the members, attribute, and method of class can be accessed. Okay, so we have public and private. Okay, public mean that you can always call the variable. Okay, but if the method is private, so it cannot be displayed onto your program. Okay, it just you can only use that variable or that declaration to perform a function that will not allow those variable, okay, those variable, for example, variable x, to be displayed on your program. Okay, for example, if you look to this, private member cannot be accessed or viewed, okay, from outside the class. It only available on the class only, on that class only. Or protected member cannot be accessed from outside the class. However, they can be accessed in inherited classes. Okay, you will learn more about the inheritance later. Inherited mean that if you have another classes with different function, okay, but this function is this classes is related to the subsequent function, so we call it as inherited. Okay, so for example, okay, integer y, integer x. Integer x is in the public section, integer y in the private section. Okay, so when you try to update my object dot y equal 50, so not allowed. Why? Because y is within the private function. You cannot update outside of the class. You can only update that within those class only. So if you try to update the data on your main program, so it will not happen. You will get an error message. Okay, for example, error y is private. Okay, encapsulation. What another thing that you should know in oriented programming is encapsulation. It is a method to ensure that sensitive data is hidden from user. Okay, to achieve this, you must declare class variable as private, and it cannot be accessed from outside of the class. If you want others to read or modify the value of private member, you can provide public get and set method. So why we use encapsulation? Because it's good practice to declare your class attribute as private. Encapsulation ensure better control of your data. Okay, so mean that if you have something, some formula, some indicators that cannot be changed and should not be changed. Okay, whether temporarily, accidentally, this thing will always remain the same. It must remain the same. Okay, so it's good to have the encapsulation or put it into the private section. And also it will increase the security of your data. Okay, so for example, if you want to access the private member, so like I mentioned earlier, it can only be accessed based on or within the same classes or inherited classes only. You cannot access it via the main program. Okay, inheritance, as I mentioned, so in C++, so it's possible to inherit attribute. Okay, inherit means that you get the same attribute, the same value from the previous classes. Okay, for example, you have class vehicle and also class car, public vehicle. So mean that it will use the same data, the same declaration that you put it into the vehicle classes. And you can also have multi-level inheritance. For example, class my child use public my class, class my grandchild public my child. Okay, so this one is level 1, level 2. So this one will be level 2. So if you have another level, and another so on, so you just put it as you see on the example. Okay, another example of multiple inheritance and access specifier. How you want to access those open classes. Okay, for example, you put programmer my obj. So we put our classes programmer, okay, into my obj object. Okay, and then you set salary to 5,000. Okay, so set salary to 5,000. And my obj dot bonus equal 15,000, and cout salary, my obj dot get salary. So get salary, you look into the get salary, so integer get salary, so return salary. So it will return the amount of salary that you currently have, and also bonus, how many bonus that you have, it will be returned to the system. Alright, and lastly is polymorphism, mean maniform, and it occurs when we have many classes that are related to each other by inheritance. Okay, but worry not. Usually in these classes, we will only focus on the concept of classes and also object only. So all this is just for your own knowledge only. So polymorphism, if you have many classes, okay, that are related to each other by inheritance. Alright, so that's an example. And C++ file, if you want to create file using C++, you can use all the coding that been provided. Okay, include IO stream and include F stream. So this is the class that you can use: of string, if string, and F string. Of string to create and write to file, if string to read from file. F string is combination of string and if string to create, read, and write to file. So the example to write to file, for example, of string my file finance.txt, you will create a new file named finance.txt. So what the content of this file? File can be tricky, but it's fun enough. So if you want another line, just create another line, so it will be created on the same file and it will be saved on that file, and that file usually will be at the same location as your program. And that's why if you want to read the file, just put back the file name that you have created, okay, and it will read your file line by line. Okay, the concept of file in C++, it will read the file line by line. Okay, exception, if you don't know the possible output of your program, you can use C++ exception. So this is coding, so try, so throw exception, cache block of code to handle errors. So in case of errors, okay, for example, try integer age equal 15. So if age greater than or equal 15, see out access granted, you are old enough, as true age. So this true will be cached by the lower bound. Okay, so cache as a deny, you must be at least 80 years old. Age is minor. Okay. And lastly, date and time. If you want to display date and time on your program, usually when you want to print a report, or you just want it to make sure that your interface is dynamic enough, so you can use date and time. So the library is ctime. Okay, just put ctime on your header file, okay, on the top of your coding. So this amount the coding that you can use. Okay, ctime, time, and ctime. Okay, either one. And then you can use tm, kc for the second, minute, hour, day, month. So it depends on how you want to display your data. You can use any of these function, okay, to display, whether you want to display only date, you want to display the day of the day, the time, and so on. Okay, so the example of how you can display those data, I can use either make time. Okay, you can look into the example. Okay, for example, times time equal make time and date time. Okay, so date time for use tm the isdt equal -1. So -1 use the computer time zone setting. Okay, for example, your time zone is +8 for Malaysia, so you will be using +8 for Malaysia. And another example, string weekday. If you want to automatically display the day on your program, for example, today is Thursday. So whenever you get those data, okay, using the datetime function, you can convert it based on the array that been provided. So it will display Thursday on your screen. Okay, another example. Alright, so I think that's all for this topic. So I would like to recap again the most important thing in object-oriented programming. You need to remember that you are creating the class for others. Okay, you want to make or you want to make minimal contact or minimal interaction from other programmer to your own information system or your own program. And to do that, you create a cluster means that you have considered all the possible interaction between others and your information system or your program. Okay, so in object-oriented programming, two of the important key point is classes and object. Okay, you can create as many objects as you want, and this object will have or can have different values. Alright, so I think that's all for today. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.